In this video, we're going to continue talking about editing images. We're going to look at some of the more advanced types of editing, and we're going to be using the GIMP image editing software for this. GIMP is a free image editor. It's very robust, has a lot of features to it. Again, I probably use only a fraction of these, and I will be really eager to see the new things that you learn and that you can teach me after you've played around with the program for a bit. In order to download it, use the link on our course website or that is included in the description with this video. Here we are in the GIMP interface, and it's pretty standard in terms of it's got the top level of menus, and things like file and edit probably look pretty familiar. There's some other things that are very specific to image editing software like layers, and we'll talk a little bit about how those function. So to start off with though, we're going to create a new canvas. And what I'm going to do for this example is take a couple of those Shakespeare images, the paintings based on Richard III, and I'm just going to put two of them next to each other. Let's say we're going to do a compare contrast kind of thing. So if you notice when you come to your new canvas here, the height of 250 is good. I want that. With that, I'm just guessing that 400 might be about right for putting these two images side by side. And if you take a look in the advanced options, you'll notice a few things here. So the resolution of 72, that is best practice for web display. It is not sufficient for print display. That's more like 300 dpi instead of, or ppi, pixels per inch in this case. 72 is exactly what you want for web display. Notice it also has down here what to fill the background with, and you can use the foreground or background color, and those you set here, and you'd want to set that before opening your canvas. You can use just white, or you can use transparency. I typically use transparency. That's sort of the do no harm. It just would be invisible. So those are all set the way I want them now, and I'm just going to go ahead and say OK, and that creates this new image. Now I'm going to go ahead and save it immediately. The best practice in terms of using any kind of software, when you create a file, do a save as, so then it's easy to save it as you go along. Now notice what this is saving as. It's saving as an XCF. That is not any kind of image that can display on a website. This is really just a file type that is specific to this software. It's basically, if you recall, we talked about editable versus flat images. So this is the editable version that the GIMP program, we can always open up an XCF in the GIMP program and we can edit all the different pieces. So it maintains our file that we're working on in an editable version. And I typically keep these editable versions in a different place on my computer than in my website. Your website should only have on your local version exactly the files that are up on the server. You want to maintain an exact correspondence between your local and your remote when you're talking about your website itself. Something like this, that's a file that I'm using to generate an image that's going to go in my website, but this file itself is not intended ever to go up on the server. This I'm going to keep in a different spot out on my computer in a different place in my hierarchy. Once we're done and we're satisfied with the image itself, then we can export a file of a usable type, a JPEG, a GIF, a PNG, that can be used on the website, and we'll export that to the spot where it goes in our web hierarchy, and then that one will get used in our code and put up on the server. So now I've got this editable version of the image. So now I'm just going to open up the images that I want to work with. So I've got one here, and then I'm going to open up a second one here. Now notice it has maintained all three of these as different files, and you can just use these visual tabs up at the top to switch from one to the other. So let's just say I'm going to grab this one. I just selected it and said Control C, and then I'm going to put it on my canvas, and I'm going to scoot it over to the left. I'll have this one on the left, and then I'm going to grab this image, and I will put this one on the right. Now, if I leave a little bit of space in between them and I have this transparency, what's going to happen is when I use it in my website, the background color of the website, whatever that is going to show through. And if I put them just directly side by side with each other, obviously, there'll be no gap there. Now, I do need to do something about this bit on the right. We don't want that. So what I'm going to do there is go back under Image, and I'm going to say Crop to Content, and then that gets rid of that issue and sizes it just exactly how we want. And I'm going to go ahead and Control S to save this. so that we've got our most up-to-date version. And then now if I'm happy with this, and let's just say I am, and I do want that little gap in between so that I can have a little transparency, the background image showing through. We're going to go under File, and we're going to go under Export As. And in this case, we actually want to use a PNG because that's how we can preserve our transparency. So we want to go under File Type by extension, and we're just going to look down our list until we find our PNG right here. And notice that this has changed. And then we want to make sure that this is going in the correct place. So now this is the point where I would navigate to the location in my website to ensure that this is going to be part of the hierarchy in my website. And as you recall, the root folder for the purposes of this demonstration website is sample pages, and this naturally is going to go into our images folder. Now, let's just say, so now notice I'm back in this file. And this actually is still editable. I can still move things around, and that's exactly what we wanted, right? We want to keep that editable version so that we come back in here and change it. Let's say I put that in my website and I didn't like it with that little gap in between, and so I decide I want to get rid of that. So that's easy enough. I scoot over the one image, I do the cropped content again. I can, if I want to, I can save this as a slightly different version, 3A, let's just say. And then notice under the export, if I wanted to, I could export and overwrite the exact file that I have. I can also do export as, and I can export it to a different name. And that's what I'm going to do in this case, because now that I don't have that little transparency sliver in there, I actually should do this one as a JPEG. It's a photograph-like file, and so that's what it should really be. So I'm just going to scroll down here on the file type, change that to JPEG, and I am going to change that name to 3A just to make it really clear which is which here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit export. Another useful thing we can do here is to generate some transparency in an image. So that can be very useful. Let's say we have a background image that we're working with, and let's take that BG01 that we were using on our web page, right? So let's say I wanted to make it a little bit see-through, and then I have a background color underneath it that kind of shows through and mixes with the color of the image that's overlaying it. So that can be a really nice effect and something that'll be different than just the image itself. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to, because this is a JPEG, it's just a flat file, it has no transparency, we actually need to add a transparency layer. So if we go under Layer and under Transparency, we choose Add Alpha Channel. So that just means that now what's underneath that file is the transparency like we had on our other canvas. Now all we have to do is modify the opacity of this image, right? And you see how that's happening. You see how that's like bringing forward. You can see that transparency underneath. I'm just basically making that less opaque and more transparent. Let's say that looks good to me. I'll go try that out and see if that works. And again, I want to be able to come back in here and edit this. So I do want to save this as an editable copy, that XCF file. So now I've saved a copy of this exact one, and now I can export this into my web hierarchy. And again, we want to save this one as a PNG because we do want to save that transparency. So another thing we can do is erase part of our file. And again, for the sake of this one, I'm gonna bring the opacity back. I'm gonna leave that alpha layer. So remember, we already have that alpha layer underneath. And then I'm going to choose the eraser tool here. And then if you go over here, you can choose any one of these shapes to be the eraser shape. So, if I want to change the size of that shape, I can modify that here. So let's just say I want to cut out a piece of this in the shape of a star. That would allow the underlying background, once again, to show through. And let's say we could even make some other ones of some different sizes here. The large star actually looks kind of upside down. So we can do a transformation like flipping that vertically and get it right side up if we want to. We also can rotate it just like we did the rotation before. obviously we can also flip horizontally if we wanted to do that as well. So those are some just easy transformations we can do. But again, the eraser tool, you can use all sorts of different shapes to be the eraser, and you can use it in lots of different ways. It really is just extremely flexible. Since this is pretty different from what we started out with, I would save this as a new file, a new editable file. And then in our export, I would go ahead and give it a new file name so you know what file you have. You can resize things in here and crop things in here, just like we did in Paint. But like I said, if that's all you're doing, Paint is a lot quicker to open and easier. So, you know, it just depends on what your actual application is. This program has a lot more things in it that it can do. These are just a few things just to, like I said, kind of get you started, give you an idea of how the interface functions. And then I would encourage you to explore. Now, the last thing I want to do before we leave this video is I just want to show you putting some of these images into a web page so you can see how they really work and how that transparency actually functions. So here we are back in our file, and let's say we're going to use one of our new versions of this file in our header. So again, just remember where we are. So we have here our images. We've got the transparent one, we've got the one with all the cutouts. So let's just start with this transparent one. It's like I was telling you, that's going to allow some of the color underneath to show through. So we just want to change the file name accordingly to the name of the file in our folder. P for transparent, and remember it's got a new extension, PNG. Make sure you make that change as well. Okay, and see how that gives it, so it's that orange color is what's underneath, and so it's basically sort of changed the hue of the file and given it this kind of rich orangish color, but not entirely, right? Because we still have some of that transparency over the file. So that's a more subtle difference. That's really, in this case, just playing with color, and it would depend on what you had underneath it too to make that change. Now let's take a look at one that's going to make even more difference. Let's do the star. We should see our background color totally shining through on this one. And sure enough, we do. So we've got our light background color, and then we have this star patterned image, and it's got the orange color that we have here. That's what shines through that. So that gives you a sense of how that might work. And then of course we have our images that we created. So I'm going to just put them at the bottom of this section. I'm going to use our center class just to stack them on top of each other so we can have a direct comparison to see the PNG that has the transparency versus the JPEG without. So just, again, make sure that you've got your file names correct, and I'm going to go ahead and reload that and take a look at the difference here. And it is applying our oval and our rounded corners like we have on all the images on this page. So that's why it's doing that. That's not part of the image. That's part of how we're displaying it on the page. But just notice the difference here. We've got the transparency where the background shows through, and then we have the one without where we just have the direct side-by-side view. And truthfully, I actually like the side-by-side view a little bit better without the transparency. So that's the one I would probably use. That just shows you the difference between those two versions. So that gives you a sense of how our images would look in a web file, and it gives you a good sense, I hope, of how image editing can be really useful to your web design.